it's on its own. And if it can't advance, like it can't here because it would be taken, then it's quite weak and vulnerable to attack. Now, we're gonna play the white side, okay? Let's see, the best way to attack or to set this up, there's a formula against the isolated pawn. If you're in a middle game position and you've got plenty of pieces on, try to trade off your minor pieces. Does everyone know what a minor piece is? Everybody? Yeah?
Bishops and knights.
Bishops and knights, okay? And what are the major pieces? Rooks, yeah.
Rooks, queens.
Yeah, that's it. Rooks and queens. And so it's better to attack this pawn with rooks and queens. Because, why is that? Because if you had a rook and queen on this file, it's attacking it twice. Okay? So it's better to trade off the minor pieces. If black had minor pieces on the board, let's say a knight and bishop. The way that the strength of this pawn is it controls these two, in this position, light squares. So if we had a knight here, it could go to a knight outpost, protected by this pawn, okay, and infiltrate white's territory. If black had a bishop, the bishop could be here next to the pawn, help it advance, and also control the dark squares. It could also be here. The isolated pawn controls the light squares, the bishop controls the dark squares. And that's a good, they're helping each other, controlling all the squares in the center of the board. So what you want to do as white in this position is trade off the minor pieces, okay? Once you've done that, or as you do that, you can then attack the pawn frontally. So let's set up a position. Say if white's already done that, and we have a position like, where do we put this baby? Like this, okay? Now the white pawn is attacking the pawn twice, black is defending twice. It's even, isn't it? So white can't infiltrate or get this pawn because it's defended. So do we have a third, I'm not gonna say piece, that's the tip off. Do we have a third unit to attack this pawn with? Pawn. So if it was white's move, we push the pawn. And it can't take because we get the rook with check. So there's nothing else we can protect the pawn with. So that's if it was white's move. So if you're defending this, if you're black, what do you play now? It's your move with black. What would you do? What would you play in order to stop this pawn from reaching c4?
Push the queen.
Push this pawn?
B5.
Yeah. B5. That stops the pawn from advancing because it can be taken with this pawn. Black wins the pawn. So now as white, we're switching sides here. As white, what do you play as white in order to try to affect c4? Yeah.
Would you go D3?
Is that what you're thinking? I also have to say, when you push this pawn, this is not only a weakness, but this is as well. This can be attacked later on, you'll see why. So if you have a sharp eye, you'd see that, okay? I'll show you in a minute why. But anyway, B3 is the move, so that the pawn can advance to C4. Pawn takes, and this pawn can't take because the rook again. So, but what has white done to his or her position? There's a weak pawn now. Can you spot the weak pawn in white's position?
A6.
A2.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, for white. By advancing this pawn, there's a weak pawn now. Because chess is a give and take game. You try to give less than you're taking, okay? That's the main thing. And white has now weakened this pawn on an open file, okay? But he wants to give this up for this. And there's something else, and you'll see later. So black then moves here and says, okay, I'm tired of defending this isolated pawn. I'm gonna go for yours on this file. So if you advance, of course, I can take this way, and I don't have that pinned rook. So what do we do as white? We can't really, I mean, this is very passive. If I go like this, then this pawn is no longer weak. So what if I take? The queen takes, right? Queen takes queen. Rook takes queen. So you've eliminated the isolated pawn, but you've given up a pawn for that. And but it's white's move, and white has the initiative, because in stopping this pawn advancing, black had to push this one, which has left a weak pawn. What's the weak pawn now in the black camp?
A6.
A6. So what do you do with the white rook?
Check.
You did, well, okay, let's look at that. Check. The king has an out,
To A8.
and then you go to A8. But what does black do? Black
Move the rook.
Check.
can defend the pawn this way, and that's a draw. That's an even game. So let's look at another way that white can attack that pawn. D6? Yeah, and the rook can't come back and defend it. So the only move I see is the push. I mean, if the rook attacks this pawn, you take and defend it. So it's got to come up here. So now what do you do? What does white do?
A6.
Rook to A6 attacks this pawn.
Then I'm sure you can like double pawn or something.
Can't defend it there, so you have to push. We take,
B4.
black takes, rook takes, and won a pawn. And it's an outside pass pawn. This king would have to come over with the rook hitting behind it and try and stop it. And then the white king would advance. Okay, so this is a technical white win, but I don't want to dwell on this. This would take too long trying to win this endgame. But what's happened was you were able to trade that off and win that A pawn. Now you got a pass pawn. You see what I mean by that? That pawn was weak, and that was the crux of black's worst position because of that. You gotta look at pawns and say, pawns give me the plans in the game, in the middle game. And also, can I transfer this into a winning end game? Okay. Any questions about that? Let's. Okay. So I'll just let you look at that again. I won't move the pieces. Now, I think, Neil, you mentioned about Aaron Nimzovich. He was a top player over 100 years ago, and he felt that the isolated pawn, you can't let it advance. And there was a 3-step process that he talked about. You restrain the pawn so it can't advance. You blockade the pawn, and then you attack it. And restrain, blockade, and attack, and destroy, he said. And he said the isolated pawn is a prisoner to be kept under lock and key. So if you see something like this, and there were openings that give one side or the other isolated pawns. And yeah, so any questions about this? So that's just one thing in the opponent's position you gotta look for. 2 weeks ago, we looked at double pawns, getting the knight in front of them. This time, we've got a rook and a queen in front of the isolated pawn because they're great at attacking. But in this position, it wasn't just the isolated pawn that lost for black. It was the fact that they had, black had to overextend their queenside pawns. So it was black to move. Okay. Take here, and white still has the initiative by attacking this. Now the queen side is weak, and then lost the pawn. All because of the problems with the isolated pawn.
So Steve, if you're in a middle game and you've got an isolated pawn, you should really be immediately setting up plans to protect it.
Yeah, by keeping the minor pieces on. If you have an isolated pawn, keep your knights and bishops as much as you can on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, and your opponent's trying to eliminate it, you know, by trading off.
Is there any positions where you would want to have an isolated pawn?
Well, I played a terrace defense, and there are positions where you have an isolated pawn and it's not weak. That was definitely weak because of the attack had, white had there. But I highly recommend this defense, guys. I'll show you. I'll just show you this and then I'll let you go. And I played this for years, and I feel to exploit this defense, you've got to be at least international master standard. And if you're playing in Ross Trevor or somewhere, you don't have to worry about someone exploiting this, I don't think. I'll show you. So as black. Now, you can play this Terrace defense. Terrace means it's named after Dr. Siebert Terrace. He was a contemporary of Emanuel Lasker that held the title for 27 years. If it wasn't for Lasker holding the title from 1894 to 1921, Terrace would definitely, I feel, be world champion. But anyway. So it's out of the queen pawn opening. It can be the English opening. It can be B3, G3, and I'll show you against any closed opening other than E4. And we'll just go with D4, okay? D5, C4, E6, okay, knight to C3, and this is the terrace move. Thank you. Normally, with this setup, black plays a knight out to defend. But Terrace said, if you're afraid of isolated pawns, give up chess. That's what he said. Because he knew that with him, this is going to be isolated. He knew that he could get a knight to this square to get an outpost. He'd have the knights, the bishops coming out to good squares, and he felt it counteracted because his piece play would counteract the isolated pawn. So what do we got here? Okay, white takes. And you can't take it with a queen because of the knight, so you take it with a pawn. Yeah, okay. You've got what's known as a static weakness, this isolated pawn. But you're not going to take this anytime soon, okay? So you take. Now white just develops. We develop. White says in the best opening towards this isolated pawn. White's going to fianchetto the king bishop, bring the knight out. Fianchetto, that means that's Italian for develop to the flank. Castle. Let's see here. This bishop could go to G5 or F4. Let's put it on G5. And I always like to bring this bishop out here. I know that looks passive, but I'm worried that later on there might be a lineup against the isolated pawn, but I got my bishop there. And I don't have to worry about it anymore. I can just play on from there. Let's see. Let's look and come here. White could take here. Don't worry. So rook here, and we'll just develop here. You know, this queen could come out here. We could let's play the rook here. Okay, because it's a half open file. And we just take it from here, and I don't have to worry about this pawn. I'm okay, because I'm going to eventually play the knight here. These bishops will be traded off. I'm all right, but anyway, we'll just play it out here. Between here. Now we'll do the knight move. Takes. Queen takes. We could play here. I gotta watch out for tactics here. Let's not play this yet as a tactic. play here, attack this. Usually the bishop comes back here, defend the pawn. We could then take now. Knight takes, rook here. I'm not worried. This is an isolated pawn, but I'm going to get the knight in. The bishop is eventually going to come here to attack the square, and I'm okay. And I've never had this setup in playing it for like 20 years. White has never played this setup. This is the best setup against the black game. This is what the grandmasters play. But I've never had to face it, to be honest. So, any questions? Yeah. So that's a terrace defense. There's also just one more, real quick, Neil, real quick. In an E pawn open. Thanks. Nice, Fred. In an E pawn opening, it comes up in the Caracan. Caracan defense. So E4, Caracan is E4, C6. It's like a good French. In the French defense, you play this and here, but this bishop gets hemmed in. In the Caracan, you're playing this and this, and the bishop can come out. So D4, D5, we take, and then C4. And you see what's going to happen. White's going to have the isolated pawn. We come here because we always want to take with a knight. We always want to take with a piece in front of the isolated pawn, so that eventually you trade off some pieces and get the rook and queen battery going. Okay? And now we take just before we castle. So that you might have a bishop b5 check, but it doesn't matter. You can bring out the knight or the bishop. But this is the Panoff attack. It was popular in the 1930s, and what it is white gets the isolated pawn, but good piece play, good squares for the pieces. This will eventually come out here, and so on. But yeah, any questions? And again, the knight's coming here because of the isolated pawn, give him an outpost. But this is better when you have it with white, because you have that extra tempo, because you made the first move of the game with white. Okay. Yeah.
So if you have isolated pawn, it's always good to have a piece behind it?
If you have, yes, in order to defend it, yeah. Now, I've had this position from both sides, and as black, I like to do this and come here, put pressure on the isolated pawn. And this knight usually comes here. After castle, the rook goes to E1 so that the knight can come up here. And it's a complex game, but like I say, white has that extra move from making the first move, so the isolated pawn, it's very difficult for black to get pressure on that. Black would have to be the one trading off the minor pieces in order to double on the d5.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any
I
questions?
appreciate it. Thank you. You fancy doing the tournament?
Yeah.